Yeah, it's such an authoritarian bent of
It's tyrannical.
we'll take care of you. Just stop thinking.
We got to get into this because this is what Douglas wrote about this. Douglas, in his first autobiography, he wrote 3. He said, one day the master came to him and said, Freddie, make no plans for the future. I will take care of you.
Ooh.
Douglas said right then, I started making my plans for this kid. Something was wrong with that picture. Because the slave master was trying to, not even trying, he did it. The slave master imposed upon Frederick Douglass a lifestyle that the slave master exempted himself from.
No.
That's what Alexandria Acosta's going to do. She's going to impose this green
New Deal
lifestyle
monstrosity,
on us and guarantee you they're going to make sure they're not under that same those same laws.
Man,
They
you guys
do it
got,
already.
seriously, I'm going to say it again. So it's libertymessengerusa.org. Got to check this out.
Please
This is
check
good.
it
We
out.
got a ton of stuff. So on those same lines, right? You have people that, let's just go with this for a minute. We have a lot of black leaders that fall in line to this, and people respect them because they have that reverend in the front of their name.
Sure.
Right? Reverend Jesse Jackson, Reverend
Al Sharpton.
No disrespect to the title of Reverend. I'm not going to do that, okay? I'm not saying anything like that. But truth is truth and a lie is a lie. And if we're not willing to say that for the sake of reputation, you're no better than the person that you're disagreeing with. You're no better than the person who tells a lie. Sure. You have to be able to say what you need to say. Where do you think, because I'm going to go with abortion for a minute. Margaret Sanger knew she had to get the black leaders involved to make sure that they could endorse basically abortion, to destroy the Negro population and other races, right? Unfavored races, she called them. You see that more and more playing out today a lot, right? Mm-hmm. And now under the Kamala Harrises of the world, now who's that lady that did the State of the Union? She did the response.
Stacey Abrams.
Half a year later,
yeah. She failed, or she lost the Georgia run.
That's right. So then she comes in and she does her little piece, and just because they're eloquent, Barack Obama did this. President Obama. Just because they were eloquent, it was almost like, they knew what they were talking about. Not really. They just knew how to spin it.
They're smarter than we are.
That's exactly it.
That's the same thing what we just referred to.
Yeah. What is it that? How do I say this? I want to ask the question right. It took you, Miss Star Parker, myself. I grew up Democrat. My dad believed the Democratic Party was for the people, and just now he voted for Trump. Like this last election, he's like, I'm voting for Trump. And it was a long, hard 6 years for me to talk to him about conservative values. I even told him, I don't care if you're Republican. I just don't want you to vote that. And I had to walk him through pieces. And it was John Hagee that preached a sermon on how to vote. And he was really staunch against Bill Clinton when he was busted with, what's her name? And so what do you think it's going to take? It's not just speaking to him, because I do that too.
Sure.
What's it going to take?
It's going to take a spiritual awakening.
Obviously.
But to start that off, those of us who are advocates of liberty, we must learn how to speak the language that resonates with them where the wall doesn't go up. Let me give an example of what I'm talking about. It really goes back to
this.
Douglas.
Do this line.
Yeah.
This is good stuff.
It goes back to understand that how the left has really demonized that word conservative and the name Republican Party. Yeah. So when you use those two words, the wall is up. It's not really that they disagree, but the wall is up. They're not going to listen. So what we have to do, we have to carefully study, show ourselves approved.
That's right.
And start speaking a language that resonates with people. We got to take a page out of the Apostle Paul's engagement strategy. And I shared with people last night, when you really think about it, through the ministry of the Apostle Paul, that's the blueprint on how to do diversity outreach. Because the Apostle Paul was a diversity outreach specialist. Yeah. He was called on commission to take the gospel to the Gentiles, people of different races, if you will. And when you look at Paul's ministry and the life of Apostle Paul, if you recall now by occupation, because God called him and commissioned him to take the gospel to the Gentiles, by occupation, the Apostle Paul was an attorney and he was a tent maker. Well, God called the Apostle Paul to establish a big tent. Big tent is a metaphoric expression for diversity outreach. And what do we say all the time? We need to have a big tent.
That's right. Mm.
So Apostle Paul gives us the strategy how to do it, because he says this. In 1 Corinthians, he said, I have become all things
That's right.
to all people, so that I may win a few.
To Christ.
And so when you look at other translations, the Apostle Paul says, I entered their world, the Gentiles, and I tried to experience life from their viewpoint. If you enter my world as a black American and you try to experience life from my viewpoint, you're going to quickly discover the word conservative and the name Republican Party. Those words are not the language of liberty. They're the language of oppression. And when you use those words, the wall is up.
Interesting.
Because of how the left has really demonized those words, and also because of Republican conservative missteps that happened back in 1964. I can share that with you later on.
Yeah. Let's do it.
Well,
So can you go there?
sure, yeah. Let me go there now.
Yeah, let's do it.
Go for it.
Let's just go there for a minute.
Here's a lot of people don't never heard this perspective, and it is this: on July 2nd, when Lyndon Johnson signed the civil rights legislation into law, you had your staunch, racist, segregationist, Dixiecrats, Democrats who filibustered the bill and voted against it. Okay, now there was a certain Republican senator who also voted against it, not because he was a racist. He voted against it based on constitutional grounds. His name was Senator Barry Goldwater. Matter of fact, Senator Goldwater was an integrationist, not a segregationist. But with his no vote, he sided with the racist Democrats.
Yeah.
Now, here's two dots you got to connect. Do you recall what Senator Goldwater's nickname was?
I don't remember.
His nickname was Mr. Conservative. What was the title of the book that he wrote and it was published in 1960? The Conscience of a Conservative.
Ooh.
Now, add insult to injury. At the 1964 Republican Party National Convention that was held at the Cal Palace in San Francisco, the Republican Party, the party of Lincoln, the party of emancipation, who do they nominate as their presidential candidate to run against Lyndon B. Johnson?
Goldwater.
Barry Goldwater,
Yeah.
Mr. Conservative. The man with his no vote sided with the racist Democrats. He went against Goldwater. He went against the Republican Party's platform because the Republican Party's platform had always been pro-civil rights. But with his no vote, even though it was based on constitutional grounds, he sided with the racist Democrats.
So how quickly did they forget, though, at that time about Lyndon Johnson when he was like straight up against the Negro, he would say?
Exactly.
How did they forget that?
Because
Or did they know?
Well, that was overshadowed by this Republican candidate running for the presidency, running against LBJ, who was for civil rights. All of a sudden,
Yeah, literally all of a
Which
sudden.
was.
Which
So
for
that was a big shift. Many of my relatives became Republicans in 1964. And I remember my dad said, Republican Party don't want us. The Democrat Party is worse. What are we going to do? So blacks felt politically homeless, in my view. And so, but what happened was conservatives, the Republican Party, made the Democrat Party look like heroes to black folks.
Wow.
Goldwater got 6% of the black vote. Dr. King even came out with a press release, July 16th, 1964. He came out with a press release. He said, quote, I encourage all Negroes and all white people of goodwill to vote against Goldwater because his conservative philosophy, quote unquote, gives aid and comfort to the racists.
oh my goodness.
So back then, when I was about 9 or 10 years old, I heard the name Barry Goldwater, conservative,
Right.
Republican Party, and the word racist used in the same sentence.
Wow.
So those two words have become culturally ingrained to mean racist. But here's the irony of this whole thing. It was the Democrat Party that supported slavery in the South.
Totally.
It was the Democrat Party that gave us segregation in terms of Jim Crow laws. But they have the nerve to call somebody else racist.
Right.
Which has been the MO for
That's right.
up
They have
to
control-
today.
they have
Control the
control
words. Yeah.
That's all
They have control of the narrative. And those of us who are liberty advocates, we got to learn how to get control of the narrative back. That's where we are.
Yep.
Because our brand has been destroyed. Conservative brand, Republican brand, it's been destroyed by the left through propaganda, negative propaganda, and of course, missteps of the past. And so, How do we get control of the narrative back?
And and
Frederick Douglass.
Massey and I have had this conversation of, especially the whole topic of messaging, right?
Yes.
And it's almost, and I'm not at all disparaging these things because obviously I support them, but when you look at the American flag, the words freedom, liberty, conservatism, it's almost like people are numb to them. Even for white conservatives, it's just kind of this usual thing, and especially with the new generation coming up, we've got a generation that looks at that stuff and goes, "That's all old white men," which has been obviously the narrative that's been pushed on that.
Slaves.
Yeah, exactly.
So therefore, give us a slavery document called the Constitution.
Yeah, exactly.
They exploit that. Here's why Frederick Douglass is important. And I'm going to start off by using a very provocative statement. And it is this. The political insight of Frederick Douglass in terms of his view of the Constitution, his view about liberty.
No.
His writings are more important, Massey, than the Founding Fathers. And, some people hear me say, they say, KCarl, that's blasphemy. that's heresy. How could you say such a thing? Here's my point. The founders gave us two magnificent documents, the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution. Now, some of the founders owned the slaves, and the slaves, in many cases, were not freed when the Constitution was ratified. Some of those founders freed their slaves, or the slaves were freed after their death. So when it comes to the founders, they're tainted, and the left exploits that. Yeah. Now, on the other hand, Frederick Douglass did not own any slaves. He was a slave. Frederick Douglass was not a racist. He was a victim of racism. But in his writings and in his speeches, he affirmed the founders and he affirmed the Constitution, and the left has no answer for that because he writes with a former slave perspective.
Got it.
You follow me?
I totally understand.
So Frederick Douglass, he
controlled the narrative.
He trumps the race card, so to speak.
He does.
Pun intended.